here's an overview of a fully functional piece of code that is going to post an expanded text add inside an existing add group. So this is basically a modified version of the existing add group add expanded text adds example in the examples folder, but it's modified so it's actually usable because the silly examples provided by add groups contain constants as the values, which should vary, and not usable at all. So here's a usable example. So basically what we're doing first is we're creating a bunch of private properties. So it's going to be add group ID, headline, headline 2, description, final URLs, path, path 2. So we're going to take a look at what it looks like inside an actual add groups interface, so we can see it here. So this is the going to be parts that we're working with. So the set path 1 and 2, which are the not very self-explanatory, these are the fields that go here. So that's like part of the display URL. And the headline 1, headline part 1, headline part 2, these are the guys that are here. Here's the description, and then the set final URLs is the actual URL on which the end user is going to land. So we have here the constructor. So what the constructor does is it actually allows us to pass these functions into an object that's going to be instantiated from this class. So we have this class, and then we want it, inside this class we have like a whole bunch of private properties. So we want to populate these private properties with the stuff that we want, right? So that's what we're going to do, and this constructor is going to allow us to do that. And here's the example of how the constructor would work. So first thing that we do is we instantiate the object. So the object is going to be created from that class, right? So we have the class here. And then we're going to set all of the values that we talked about before. So we have the add group ID, we have the headline, headline 2, very good interesting description is the description. Then we have here the URL, we have the path 1 and the path 2. And what we're going to do is basically populate these values via the constructor. So the stuff that we're passing here is the stuff that is the parameters here. So basically that's what the parameters are going to be working. These are the parameters that are going to be setting the private properties. So we say, okay, hey, the private property of add group ID is going to be defined as AID. So that's what we have here. That's what it's going to be defined as. And then we move down the line. So once we instantiate the object with these parameters here, we end up with an object that contains all of these private properties. So it contains all these private properties, but they're not filled up with these values, rather. That's what I mean. So then we move on to the part where we talk about where we're actually running the example. So the way that the Adwords is set up is that this Adwords class is that it has two functions. So two public functions. They're public static functions, I think, when we're looking in the examples folder, but here we're making them public functions because we're going to be passing the private properties inside. And if you try to pass a private, if you try to pass a static property inside a non-static property inside a static function, it fails for some reason. So that's why it's modified. In the examples, it looks differently. So anyways, we're working here with a public function run example, and there's another public function called main. So what main is going to do, it's actually going to execute this function here. And this function here, it takes the parameters of Adwords services, Adwords session, I guess it's authentication, and then the add group ID. So that's what the main function is going to do. It's going to execute the run example, and it's going to pass the three parameters. So this one, authentication, and then finally this add group ID. So if you remember that this add group ID is actually the private property that we set here. So when we execute the run example, it's going to be filled up with our add group ID that we passed when we instantiated the object. So when we go to the run example, it has this add group ID, and then it starts grabbing the stuff that we defined before. So it grabs the value of this object's headline part 1, headline part 2, the stuff that we were defining basically here, set description, set path, and then what it does here is basically it creates the expanded text add object using the expanded text add class, and it populates it with a whole bunch of basically with a whole bunch of stuff. So it populates it here. Then it actually creates the add group add object. So we have the expanded text add, and then we have the add group add. So these are two objects that interact with each other. It basically instantiates it. Then we said that set the add group ID as the add group ID. So the add group ID, remember, that's what we passed before. And then we'll say add group ID using the method set add. We're going to set the expanded text add. So that's all the stuff that we were defining here. So all of the stuff that's inside this object. Then it goes to the next part, which is basically setting the status. So the status is going to be set to paused in the beginning. And then what we're going to do is create the add group add operation and add it to the list. So the stuff that we're doing here is we're basically like building up the objects that we need to build to create that add group add. So we have the expanded text add that gets passed into the add group add object. So we have this add group add object, and now it's actually time to build up the operation. So the operation is going to be the add group add operation. So that's the stuff that's actually going to be adding that object into the add group account. Then we're setting the set operand is add group ID. Set operand, like I'm not sure what this is exactly, but this is just an object. We're passing these methods. We're executing these methods that belong to this object, right? And we set the operator as add, so that means that we're adding that add group into the account. And then the operations, basically we add into the operations the operation that we defined here. So what that means is that you can actually create several text adds, and you can keep on adding them to the operations thing here. And the way that you would do it is basically you would have like you would have this part here like duplicated, and actually the example script, that's what it shows. It shows of how you would add 2 expanded text adds. In this case, it's just 1, but it gives you an idea that you can do that. You can actually add a whole bunch of adds, and once you load them up into this array that is going to hold all of these text add, I guess, operations, you run the add group services mutate, and then it executes and posts all of the add group expanded add group adds that you have defined with the result here, and then it basically outputs the stuff, the result. So it basically says, hey, for each result, get value as add group ID. So basically this is going to hold, like by executing this method that belongs to the object result, which is here, we're going to get the summary of what was performed, which is going to be stored inside the add group add item. So then we access that item's properties via these methods. So get add ID, get add headline, and then okay. So now let's just basically execute it and see what happens. So here's the test file. We're going to execute the test file, and then it says, okay, expanded text add was added. So if we look inside our account, let's see if it has been added or not. We're going to go to the, so if we look under the add groups, it should appear here. Yeah, and here it is. So if we analyze it, we see here the headline 1, headline 2, very good, interesting description, path 1, path 2, and the URL.